So we did have a challenge for this lesson, and that was to use the nested data that we have in the JSON file and output a count of the various skills of each one of the friends, and maybe have a count of each one of the different skills and how many skills our friends have all together. So looping through the data, so we've already got the data being output into our console. So we're retrieving back the data from the JSON file. And we already did that within the last lesson where we're using fetch and then just accessing the file contents. So now we need to make use of the data that's returned within the JSON object and do some programming with it using JavaScript. So we're going to create a blank list of skills, and this is going to be an object that we're going to use. And then using the data friends and for each, looping through each one of the variable values, and we're going to console log out the value skills that each one of the friends has. So refresh, and these are all the skills that our friends have, and see some of them there are some overlap, so we do want to count those. So let's create another loop into the skills using this array, and then for each once again. So it's a for each within for each, and then returning back the skills the same way we did the other ones. So now within the console, we're going to output each one of the skills separately. So refresh, and that gives us a full picture of all the skills that our friends have. So we also wanted to take those skills and we want to count them. And we already set up a blank object. And with an object, we know that we can specify as a string value as the object name. So we can use these skills within the object to set them as values. So let's take the object and create a brand new one. So within skill list, and using the bracket notation, we're going to take the skill value and we'll just equal it to 1 for now. And then after we finish our loops, and just outside of the loops, we'll use console log and output skill list into the console. And I'm going to comment these ones out so that we can avoid some of the confusion. So refresh, and now we've got a listing of all of the skills, but they only have the one in there. So what we want to happen is every time the skill exists, then we want to increment it by 1. So we can do that with a condition where we check to see if the object already exists, if it already has a value. And if it exists, then we're going to take it and add 1 to it. And if it doesn't exist, then we're going to set it to 1. So we take the skill list skill and increment it by 1. And remember, we're incrementing the value that's being associated with it by 1. So this returns back that we've got two friends that have JavaScript, or we've got two instances of JavaScript as a skill within our friends, HTML 2, everyone has CSS, JSON are 2, and Ajax are 1. So that's how we can count and we can update the number of skills that are friends. And essentially what we wanted to do was really just practice and make use of the nested values that are contained within the JSON object. And as we work with more complex JSON objects, then we can become more familiar with how to extract the data and make use of it within our applications. Hey, finally, this is the lesson where we're going to make use of that random user API that we were looking at in the earlier lessons, where it's got all of that data that's been contained. And you've actually learned all that you need in order to access this data and make use of it within the web page. So let's create a brand new file, and this is going to be our new project. So creating a new file, and this can just be a regular HTML page, and saving that as, and I'll call it users. And we're going to list out a bunch of the users that are contained there. So using HTML, let's set up the head, title, JSON, and then the body tags. And then just before we close off the body, we'll add in the JavaScript here. And this is where we're going to make our fetch request and access the contents of the API. We'll just create one quick div there and then use that div as our area to output the content from the API. I'll open it back up to where we've got the JSON users. And then here, let's select the output div using the document query selector as we did before. And we only have the one div, so we'll just select it by the tag name. So this gives us a place that we can output the content. Next thing that we want to do is using fetch. We want to make a fetch request to the API endpoint. There's more information available at randomuser.me. If you want to access the API, the URL is randomuser.me/API and then $results, and that will return you back as many results as you want. So I believe you can go all the way up to 5,000. So this is an example of some of the content that's being returned. Every time it's going to be different fake user. They're going to have email addresses, birth dates, addresses, and there's a whole bunch of rich JSON data. And this is one of the reasons that I really like this API, because we've got within the results, they've got some really good simulated user information. And this is also a great way to practice accessing that data using JSON, because it's got a lot of nested objects within the objects as well as within the arrays. So we can really make use of the skills and practice what we've learned in the earlier lessons. So going back into fetch, and also we can set the URL. So sometimes in some cases, maybe our URL, we might have a different URL. So let's just reference the URL within the fetch request. So we're accessing that URL. This is just a regular GET request. And then we are getting back the response object. Once we have the response, we're going to return it back using the response JSON in fetch. And then once we have the data ready to be used, then this is the JSON data within a JSON output. And for now, we'll just output it into the console so that we can see and make sure that we do have the right connection. And I'll just break these apart to separate lines so that we can see the full fetch request. So let's refresh. And now we see we're returning back the data. So this is in fact coming from the random user API. And all of the results are within the results array. And this is as many results as we've requested. So we can also change this number. So if we only wanted 10 results, we could go down to 10 results. And because we want this application to be flexible, we want to make use of all of the results. So let's output them on the page. So we want to select the images from the results and just output them within the div that we created earlier. So let's create a function in order to handle the output. So this is going to take in the data object. And for now, we can just use the same console log of data. I'll update this to output. And that should leave us in the same spot and I'll call this users because I've already used output. So just update that to users, refresh, and we're in the same spot where we've got the results coming in. So next, what we want to do is loop through the results. And from what we learned in the earlier lesson, so the results are contained within data, and we need to find the array, which is data results object, and that's going to equal the array. And once we get to the array, that means we can use for each to loop through the contents. And we can return back the values. So these ones are each going to represent each one of the users. So let's try that. And usually as well, I like to do it every step of the way to use the console just to make sure that I'm getting the object information properly. And it also used the console to extract the information because it gives you a really nice, easy way to open up the object and see the path to the content that you want to return back. So in this case, I do want to return back picture and thumbnails within the picture object. So let's select picture and save and refresh. And within picture, I have 3 options. So just go into thumbnail and refresh. And once I do have the value that I do want to use within the application, I'm ready to conclude the application. And in this case, let's select the output element. We're going to update the inner HTML. where we're going to add to it. Those are our backticks. And setting up the image. And because we've got paths to the image source, and close off the image tag. And then within here, we can specify the val picture using the same path that we were just outputting into the console. So let's refresh. And now this is going to give us a collection of pictures, thumbnail pictures of the users that are being returned back from the random user array. So if you want more, you can update to 50. And again, these are all just random users that are coming back from that array. So go ahead and try this out, and as well experiment a little bit with the random user JSON data that's coming back. Output different values that's contained in there and output it into your web page so that you can become more comfortable with extracting data from a large JSON object. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know within the Q&A section. I always love to hear from you. Thanks again for taking the course. All of the source code has been included. And as always, I do suggest that you do try that out and get comfortable with the code